All right. Well, hello, everyone. Hello and welcome to the Figge Art Museum's virtual Thursdays at the Figge series. My name is Melissa Moore, and I'm Director of Education at the Figge, and I'm very happy you could join us tonight. For the time being, we're hosting programs nearly every Thursday evening. Some are in person, some are virtual, and some are both. So please check the Figge's website for those topics, the program format, and to register. We're able to offer these programs at no cost to you, thanks to the generous sponsorship provided by Chris and Mary Rayburn. Thank you, Chris and Mary. And while these programs are free to watch, I do encourage you to consider becoming a Figge member. Your membership helps us continue to fulfill our mission of bringing art and people together, even when we aren't able to be together in person. So a quick note about tonight's program, questions are encouraged. If you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the Q&A or into the chat at any time, and we'll get to those as we can. So tonight, we are exploring the exhibition Border Cantos, Sonic Borders, which is on view at the Figge through June 5th of 2022. This exhibition is a collaboration between photographer Richard Misrach and artist and composer Guillermo Galindo, and it explores the complexities of the southern border through photography, sculpture, and sound. And this exhibition really invites us to bridge boundaries and initiate important conversations around them. So the exhibition also humanizes the Mexican-American border, inviting visitors who come in to view it to engage with the complex and often misunderstood experiences of those who are seeking a better life in the United States. So our featured speaker tonight is artist Richard Misrach. He is one of the most influential photographers of his generation. In the 1970s, he helped pioneer the renaissance of color photography and large-scale presentation that are in widespread practice today. Richard has worked in the landscape for over 40 years, and is probably best known for his ongoing series, Desert Cantos, which is a multifaceted approach to the study of place and man's complex relationship to it. So a recent chapter of the series is Border Cantos, and again, that's what you're able to view at the Figge. This was made in collaboration, as I mentioned, and we're really thrilled to have been able to host Guillermo Galindo about a month and a half ago, and now feature Richard for the second part of the series program around Border Cantos Sonic Borders. It is a privilege to have Richard here with us today. Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, and I'm so pleased you have the exhibition. It seems to have had, Guillermo and I began it years ago, and it's just had this life. It just keeps going and going. So that's very gratifying, of course, for us. So should I just jump in and just kind of run through some pictures?
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So my practice for many years has been to travel the American desert and just explore and discover and see what I find there. And over the years, I've done series, which I call Cantos, on fires, man-made floods, space shuttle landings, nuclear test sites, military bombing ranges. Whatever I find, I would end up doing a series. And those series that I call Cantos, they were like photo essays, the kind of thing you would have seen in Life magazine years ago. But at some point I was reading literature, Ezra Pound, he did a 50-year-long poem called The Cantos, and it gave me the idea that by connecting these independent series, these photo essays, if you will, and putting together, I would create an epic structure for the work, for my look at the desert. So by putting the deserts with the fires with the floods and the floods with the border pictures, suddenly you get a much broader poetic kind of look at everything. And so I'm going to jump in here. This project with Guillermo Galindo, it's called Border Cantos. There's 8 of the Desert Cantos. I'll go through a number of them that are in this project. But they follow along the fires and the floods and the space shuttle landings, that kind of thing. The first picture you're looking at here is the border wall in California. It was made around 2009, and I had known about the border wall for years, but at some point, and it probably is around 2009 when it became serious for me, I realized that the border that I was seeing in person was not the one in my head, not the one in newspapers and magazines, and the one, kind of in the common consciousness. And that was a revelation for me. So I decided at that point that I wanted to start photographing in earnest. And I started traveling from the U.S. Coast near Tijuana in California to about 2,000 miles to the Gulf of Mexico in Texas. And I went through California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. So these pictures, this first canto is called The Wall. And these are photographs of the US-Mexico border, the wall that had been built there. So the first picture was in California. This one's in Arizona near Nogales. This also is in California, in a very different place. This is a different kind of wall. So another thing that I discovered through all this is that there's different kinds of border walls. This one's called, it's been nicknamed the Normandy Wall after the famous Normandy fences during World War II. But basically, this is a vehicle wall. So people can just walk over this, but it's in a remote area that's so remote that you don't need to have a big tall wall to keep people from climbing over. It's really to make it hard for vehicles to get through. This is another area in California that's more remote. And another one. So kind of the first canto, the key one, I guess, of the wall itself, shows kind of the different iterations, the different environments that they're in. They're quite different. They have quite different feelings. I mean, obviously, right here, somebody could just walk over, and while I was here, a truck came flying up, and it was 4 guys in masks with machine guns. I don't know if they were a cartel or what. They looked at me. I was all by myself in the middle of nowhere, and I went, "Oh my God, this looks terrible." And my impulse was I just kind of waved at them, smiled, and they all waved and smiled back and drove off. It was as simple as that. It was very strange. This is another border wall, another formation. This one's in Texas, I believe. One of the things that I noticed a lot, which was really fascinating and unexpected, is the border wall isn't continuous. It would go on for 50 miles, 100 miles, 150 miles, and then just stop. And people could just walk right around it. It was kind of surreal. In this case, this is at the California coast and near San Diego and Tijuana. And what was interesting about here is all you have to do is just swim out a little bit and go around. And, if you do that at night or when nobody happens to be around, you could easily get around the wall. I did hear many stories of people like renting jet skis, going around, going to visit family and taking the jet ski back, and kind of on a regular basis. So what was interesting about that notion, the more I heard about it, the more I heard about how people could get around the wall. In fact, let me get to a picture of it. This is another one in Nogales. This is actually a field, an agricultural field, a cabbage field in Texas. And a lot of times you'd have these crops that go right up to the border wall. In Texas, it's a very strange situation where the wall, the Rio Grande River separates Texas from Mexico. So the wall can't go along the side of the river because the river is constantly changing its banks and things, depending on the weather and the rising tides. So the wall's built inland, and so the wall's built on, there's people in Texas that live on both sides of a wall. And then people would come from Mexico to work in the cabbage field. So they just come around, work in the field, and then go back home. So the wall is just kind of an absurdity. It's very easy to cross over, to get around. I learned very quickly that the border wall is really more of a symbol than a functioning wall. if that makes sense. It was a political symbol, a very expensive one. It cost 3 to 12. The wall that we're looking at here, this was before Donald Trump became president, by the way. And the walls that existed at this time cost about $3 to $12 million a mile to build of taxpayer money. And again, it was just a political symbol. It didn't keep anybody out. Yeah. This is in California, remote desert areas. This is Nogales. And this particular wall is a more urban area, and it splits Nogales in two. There's Nogales, USA, and Nogales, Mexico. Lots of times families, friends, kids that were going to school on one side or the other. Then once this wall went in, it cut them off. So it was very disruptive in that way, but it didn't stop smugglers or whatever, or people desperate to get over it. It just ruptured communities. You can see this is an older version of the wall. The material there looks different, and it's older. And one of the things, the early versions of the wall before 2009 were often made by leftover landing mats for helicopters during the Vietnam War. They had these platforms that helicopters would land on. And after the war, they just brought them back, and they ended up recycling them into the wall. So you'll see a lot of walls that look like this, kind of a little funky and pieced together, but they found a second purpose. Another wall, this is a wire and mesh wall. So what I was leading to before, this is a video that I found. I didn't make this, somebody made this, showing it's like a 18-second little video clip, YouTube clip. These two 16-year-old girls climbed the wall without a ladder, without a rope, just scaled in 18 seconds. So again, it shows that even when you have a very tall wall, people could get over it really quickly and without much difficulty. Again, in California, you can see this wall just goes on, stops, and all around it, you can see, garbage, backpacks, things like that are just sitting in the landscape from people that came around, dumped their stuff, and, probably a car would meet them there and drive off. A lot of times when I was photographing, I would go to these places, and they're very remote. I just drove out there, along the dirt roads that the Border Patrol uses. I'd go out there, I'd photograph, hour or two. Eventually, Border Patrol probably would come out there because there's ground sensors, and I would set them off by my activity of making pictures. So they would come and kind of come up really fast and see I was an old white guy and with a camera, and they said, "See you later." There's no problem. Another wall in Texas where you can just literally walk around. These are all different walls. This was in Arizona. This was a wall that was unfinished and had been that way for years. In certain areas in California where people were coming over a lot, probably by dune buggies and things like that, some Border Patrol were very innovative. They took these these pipes and configured this almost sculptural way to discourage people from coming that way, to blockade it. This is an area when I was photographing here, Border Patrol came up, and I said, I asked him what was happening there because this looks so strange. And he said, what happens in this area is that people would come in their dune buggies or whatever, they would have blow torches or settling torches and just cut off sections of the little wall, move it aside, and just drive through. And so the Border Patrol would come back and try to kind of repair it and make it functional, because it was constant. It was like just almost on a regular basis. So you get this kind of strange sculpture from that. In Arizona, in this place, this was a Normandy style fence potentially. Obviously not very efficient. People could walk around it or drive around on either side. Maybe it was just being stored there, but it did seem kind of humorous. This was in Texas. This was really interesting. I think around 2013, I discovered this wall freestanding like this, and I figured, oh, it's still under construction. And maybe there's going to be a gate there, or maybe they're going to continue out the wall and close it off. So I came back 2 years later, and the only thing that had changed was that little patch of grass grew around it. In fact, when I was photographing the second time, a Border Patrol agent came up to me. He was kind of hostile. And I said, what is this? Why is this functioning like this? And he said, well, it's to discourage people. They're supposed to push them to the end of the wall, and that's where the Border Patrol will be waiting for them when they kind of come around. And I try to point out that was really absurd with this particularly short section, and he wouldn't have much of it. So here's again more of that Vietnam landing pad recycled into border wall. So at this point, I should talk a little bit about my collaboration with Guillermo. I've been photographing a little bit in 2009 on the border, and I'd done one picture in 2004 that turned out it was about the border, but I didn't know it at the time, and I'll get to that later. But in earnest, I began photographing in 2009, and soon after, maybe a year or two later, I met Guillermo. We were both at a lecture, and he had been to the Texas-Mexico border and found a bunch of human artifacts and collected them and turned them into instruments, and he performed them at this pop-up magazine. I was at the pop-up magazine for a different project, but when I saw what he was doing, I went, oh my God, we've got to work on this together. I invited him to my studio. Luckily, he lived in Oakland, California. I lived in Berkeley and had a studio in Oakland, not far from where he lived. And what I had been doing, along with my wall pictures, I photographed these human effigies. And these were, I'll show these in a second, but these were like scarecrows somebody made along the border of things discarded, clothing, materials found on the border, and they were kind of like sculptures or effigies. And when I saw that, I thought, my God, this is so interesting. He's collecting things on the border, making instruments. I'm collecting, photographing things found on the border that were turned into sculptures. And we should come. So I had prints all around the studio, and we began collaborating at that point. And Guillermo wasn't going to the border very much. He had a family, he was teaching, but I was traveling a lot along the border. And so anytime I'd find things along the border, I would collect them, send them back to Guillermo, or bring them back to Guillermo, and he would turn them into sculptures and instruments. So it became a really dynamic, interesting collaboration. This is all by way of leading to this picture. I met this guy. I saw this chunk of steel, which is a crushed piece of border wall, and I met this guy in a cafe somewhere, and somehow we started talking, and I told him that I wanted to get this piece and bring it back to California, and he offered to pick it up with me. So he picked it up. I couldn't lift it. It was very heavy. Put it in his truck. Then I hired somebody else to bring it back to California, and I brought it to my studio, and I showed Guillermo, and he created this out of it. So that's the steel. He created the Angel Terminator, he calls it. I think it's after a Buñuel film, but it's like it functioned like a Chinese gong. makes an incredible sound, and he kind of performs on it. Everything that's here, the center section of metal is part of the border wall itself. The chain from the top is actually a Border Patrol drag chain. You'll see more of those in some pictures coming up that I brought back. And then the lumber around it was actually lumber used in the construction of the border wall that I brought back. And then I have some friends, architects, friends who helped structurally. Guillermo knew what he wanted to do, but we needed somebody to give us the structural dimensions to make it work and help us fabricate it. And so that's what that is. That's Guillermo performing it. It's actually set up in my studio there when we first put it together. Now this is the second Border Canto. This is the effigies that I was talking about. These I just found in California desert along the border. I don't know who did them, why they were done, but somebody had made probably a dozen of these, some right here in this gully, some a little further east, some in the hills around, and they were very mysterious. And I didn't know if they were warnings to migrants coming across the border. I didn't know if they were protests against the Border Patrol. I don't know what their purpose was, but they were very haunting. Here you can see one. If you look deep into the desert there, you can see it way back in there. These are the pictures I had up around my studio when Guillermo came over for the first time. Guillermo surprised me one day. He came over, didn't tell me what he was going to do, but he brought this into my studio, and it looked like one of the effigies. It was from clothing I brought back from the border, but he turned it into an instrument. And you can see there's some strings along there that he plays with a violin. I forget what you call it, but whatever, you know what it is. And then he also pounds in the chest is a box, a sound box. So he pounds that and gets a sound out of that. Let's see, I think I have a sound of it. Another Border Canto was called, oh my goodness, it's been a while since I've talked about this work. Anyway, these were, it'll come back to me, but basically I was driving along Texas, and along the highway there, I noticed a bunch of Border Patrol agents doing target practice. I think it's called target practice. And so I decided, oh, it'd be great to go and photograph them doing that. And I tried to go up to it, but it was locked. You know, the place was sealed off with a fence, electronic fence. And so I couldn't. So I said, oh, darn. And I just moved on, which is what I do. And then I drove on a couple hours to the coast where I photographed. And I came back at the end of the day, and the Border Patrol agents were gone, but the gate was stuck open, and it was kind of going doink, 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 staying open, and just wide enough so a car could get through. And I couldn't resist. So I came in there. I photographed the targets. I noticed on the ground, shot up targets, and on the fence too. And then on the ground, I noticed all these shotgun shells. And as I was walking along, and there was millions of shells. It just was, they were everywhere. And you'd walk on them and make this weird sound. And I immediately thought of Guillermo. And so what I did was I got a bunch of trash bags. I went back and I gathered all the shells and I packed them up and I shipped them to Guillermo. And I'll show you what he did with them. I mean, they were colorful, they were strange, they were beautiful, but oh, and before I get to what Guillermo did with it, then the other thing, and this was not in the book or the show, but it's another canto. It's the 9th canto, and it's got to do with the balls. Everywhere I'd go, I would find balls that fight golf balls, tennis balls, soccer balls. When kids playing on one side of the border, if the ball went over the top, over the wall, that was it. There was no way to retrieve it. So I constantly find balls up and down, all the way across the 2,000-mile border to Texas. And I brought a bunch back and, I photographed them there. Here's a soccer ball in California. And Guillermo took the shells that I brought back and the soccer balls, and he made, he built the piñata. He calls it a bullet shell piñata, in the shape of the soccer ball. And this is quite large, and it makes an incredible sound. It's an incredible instrument. And again, with Guillermo, if you've heard him speak or he performed for you, for Guillermo, all these objects have their own intrinsic sound, he believes, and he just releases them, and he creates just new ways to make new kinds of sounds, and it's very powerful. It's a clip, a still from a video of Guillermo playing, so you can see the scale of the soccer ball piñata. Another canto is called Cutting for Sign. And it was really interesting, along the border, there is really high technology of surveillance cameras, the video cameras, ground sensors. They have blimps flying over. They have all kinds of electronic fancy stuff. But one of the things they use, which apparently is the most effective, is they borrow, it's called Cutting for Sign. It borrows from a Native American tradition of tracking animals. They smooth out an area of sand, a long area, and they can follow animal tracks. Indians could, and follow the animal tracks. What they do here is the Border Patrol takes tires and drags them behind their trucks all along along the wall, next to the wall, and they drive very slowly, and they see if there's any footprints, and they just keep going. If they find footprints, then they can stop. And footprints are, you can tell different kinds of shoes. You can tell how many people are going, and they do it every day. And sometimes they do it 3 or 4 times a day, just to kind of go back and forth slowly along the border doing that. So it's a very interesting process. Again, called Cutting for Sign. Very crude, very basic kind of do. And you find the tires everywhere, and they're chained together, they're tied together. Sometimes the big tire. This is a suite of tires. So the top row is California. The second row from the top is Arizona. The third is New Mexico, and the fourth is Texas. So you can see it's very simple, low tech, but used along the 2,000-mile border. And apparently it's very effective. Along with tires, they use other things. This was like a car wash brush, but I've seen all kinds of weird things. It's another one. In Texas, I saw this chain, beautifully crafted chain, very, very, very elaborate. And you can see the chains, how you can how they're pulled. That's the chain that I brought back that's used in the Angel Terminator. And here you can actually see an animal footprint and my footprint. And you can see where, you know, where the tires smooth out a very specific area. And this is, you can see it's, this one's got basically five tires. Or maybe it's four and the one was redone or something, but very, you know, it's really, it was very mysterious when I first found these and didn't know what they were for. It took me a while, you know, research to finally come on what's going on here. And then Guillermo, yeah, so Guillermo then turned some of my photographs into musical scores. So you can see these are the tracks for Cutting for Sign. He took that visual thing and created you know, a graphic score that he could play. This is the Zappitello, another instrument that Guillermo made. This is based on Leonardo da Vinci's, I think it's called, yeah, the Martello, which is a hammering machine. And this was a drawing that Guillermo did, and he showed it to me. And so that gave me the idea, and I found this boot. Somebody had jumped the wall here and left the boot and a beautiful version of Dr. Zhivago in Spanish, but an old, beautifully printed copy, which I brought both back. There's a big tire. And this is the final version. You can see the boot. That is the boot that you saw in the previous photograph. That's a glove that was brought back. That tire is probably the same tire that, or one of the tires that I brought back. And then you can see the targets that design for the targets for target practice used as kind of gears. So what Guillermo do, he would crank this thing and make a rhythmic sound. It's quite powerful. Another canto is called The Other Side, and anyway, this is just a home in Brownsville that yeah, the wall just goes right up to it. This is in Arizona. Often the wall goes through communities, poorer communities. In general, the wealthier communities do not let the wall go in their backyard. It's not good for property prices. So again, Arizona, this is the US side. Cemetery. Once these walls were built, and you could see a lot of properties abandoned and property values went down. This is in California. This is a big shopping mall on one side, right up. I mean, the parking lot of the shopping mall is right up against the fence. This is actually the Tijuana side, or the Mexico side of the border. And there, and you see this, it's not uncommon to see people build their homes using the border wall as the like fourth wall of the home, of the structure. So that's what they're doing there. In the US, you wouldn't be allowed to do that. You'd have to have a space against it. But I thought that was fascinating. In Texas, locals there that live along the border, that, you know, yeah, they protested the fence itself too, because it just does havoc to a lot of aspects of living. This was actually kind of funny. There's a county golf course here that people use. This is on the wrong, this is in Texas, but on the wrong side of the wall. So I think I was saying before that because of the Rio Grande River, which is a really long border, it's the border between the US and Texas. The wall, if there's a wall, it's got to be inland. And so lots of US property is on the wrong side of the wall. And this is a case of a county golf course. There's an art museum up against the wall. I think this is Brownsville. This is a man crossing the Rio Grande River. What they would do here, the place I'm standing, you see all these little tchotchkes, little things fabricated, souvenirs, if you will, that are made on the Mexico side. These guys would wade across the river, put them out there, ask you to, if you took something that, walking sticks, things like that, I got a bunch and they asked you to leave a little money, a couple dollars. And so you do that and then they'd come back later and hopefully there'd be some little bit of money there for them and they would take it back over. And that was just a regular occurrence over there. In Marfa, they have a Border Patrol blimp that looks for people coming across. There's several other places where they do that too. This is a surveillance tower. You'll see these all along too. This is I mean, there was I forget what you call them, but they're groups that kind of monitor the border, to try to keep migrants from coming over. There's a lot of racism. Here, if you look really carefully, this right along the border in California. It says we must secure the existence of our race and a future for white children. And there's a swastika over there, and that's a famous, I think it's called the 14. I didn't know what it was at the time, but later I heard an NPR story and they were talking about this notion of 14. It's kind of a slogan, kind of like the equivalent of swastika, but a slogan. And you can also see there the Border Patrol sign, cutting for sign tracks. On the Mexico side, this is where a teenager had gone over and was killed. So there's a memorial there. And then the Border Patrol put up a wall. The vertical came after that to keep people, to discourage people from trying to go that way. This is in Hopeville, California. This is these are all graves of unknown people that have come across. John, they're called John and Jane Doe, and there's a lot of children in there too. This is interesting. This was the first photograph that I ever made along the border. I mentioned earlier, I didn't know what it was. This was in 2004. And in my wanderings in the desert, I saw this blue agua barrel and a flag. And I thought, well, maybe it's for off-roaders. That made the most sense to me, that people that would take their off-road dune buggies out in these remote areas. And it gets hot out here. It gets like 120 degrees in the summer. It's barren. There's nothing out there. And so I photographed this with my 8x10 camera, view camera, and then put it away. And I didn't know what it was. And it wasn't until many years later when I started this project that I recognized what this was. And it became the series, a canto called Agua, which means water. all the barrels you're seeing now are from recent years. So the first one was 2004. These were done in 2015, 16, 17, that kind of thing, or actually 2013, 14, and 15. And there's groups, humanitarian groups in California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. They're not affiliated necessarily with each other. Often the religious groups, they just they put out water so that people don't die of heat exposure in these areas. And so each one of these barrels will have like 6-gallon jugs of water. Sometimes they have the flags like you saw in the last one. Sometimes in this case, there's just rocks on top of it. So I guess it doesn't blow over. And I think like this is in California, this particular style of putting water out. And I think they have like 260 stations, and volunteers every other week go out, check each of these. If any of the water is used up, they replace it with new jugs. If not, they leave it because it means it's still good. And they do that during the summer when it's the hottest. These are all different Agua stations that I photographed. In Arizona, they do it differently. They don't use the big barrel. They just put out jugs of water like this. I went off with one volunteer, and it was quite a trek. We both carried jugs of water to remote areas where people have been known to die the most. And it would take half a day just to hike out there from where we were. And again, these are volunteer groups. One of the main guys I was going around with was a Republican. We didn't agree on anything politically, but we both agreed on the humanitarian component of this. And it was, so it kind of broke down normal political parties in terms of what their mission was. And unfortunately, people and even Border Patrol have been known to slash the water bottles. So people put the water out just to save people in an emergency, but you'll see this kind of slashed jug quite a bit. In this case, this was a barrel that had been painted green and orange so that it could be seen better. And then somebody came and used it for target practice. You can see over it. So that barrel was shot up. It's on the right. There's a grave site there for 4 people that came, and there was no water for them. They died there. So you can see these kinds of flags over the years. Sometimes there were blue flags, and sometimes there were these multicolored flags. I would bring those back for Guillermo, and he would turn them into musical scores. That's one of Guillermo's scores, using my photograph and going over it. Another of Guillermo's scores. I found this backpack. Somebody must have left it. I'm not sure why. I brought it back. Clothes. There's a empty can of tuna up there on the right. Wrapped water jugs. They would do that, with these blue jugs or black jugs. In the heat, they would get so hot, by wrapping it, it would insulate and keep the water cooler and drinkable a lot longer. Empty tuna can. So along the border, all 2,000 miles, I would find human artifacts. And they, each one kind of had its own hidden story. And then Guillermo, would take these and like kind of, as he would put it, release their story. Yeah. This is a foam shoe. Basically, as I told you, for cutting the sign, they would smooth the sand and they could see footprints and anything. So people from Mexico, they knew of this, so they would make either out of carpet or this foam. That's all you would see. Carpet or foam booties is what they were called. And by tying these around their shoes, they wouldn't leave any tracks, any recognizable tracks. So so that's what this is. So I brought these back. Here in the tree, if you look carefully, you can see a carpet booty. It's just like a section of carpet that they would tie around their shoes. This is the El Doctor Shivago. This is what I call a super grid, where I would put together all these artifacts into one single large piece. Be socks, hats, religious items, towels, shirts, whatever, cigarettes, toothpaste, toothbrushes, whatever. In 2015, I think it was, I was near Texas, or in Texas, near Brownsville, and there was an area where something like 50,000 children came over unaccompanied, and there's fields and fields of just children's items. This is probably like a 4-year-old tennis shoes. There was no adult items, it was all children's. It was very, very haunting. I brought back these items. Could have been gum or little girl's tweezers or shoe, and Guillermo created sound out from them, performed them. Take a toothbrush against a shoe, or play the broken comb. I found this. This was on the U.S. side. This was a ladder made out of branches. Again, remember this wall is made at costs $3 to $12 million a mile. It's made out of steel. It's quite a monument, or what I call an anti-monument. But people can just climb over it or use a little homemade ladder like this to scale that and counter it. This the Border Patrol found this and took it after the fact. This was a rubber inner tube that people used to float across the Rio Grande River in Texas to get across. They do that a lot of times. In California, this was a bicycle. Apparently what they did in this one area that I was photographing is they would throw bikes over the fence, and then it was kind of in a hilly area, and then they would jump on the bikes and ride down the hills. It's because the ground sensors would pick up their footprints, them walking, but it did not pick up the bikes. And eventually the Border Patrol caught on to this, and when they got the bikes, they would actually, you can see that the tires bent. A common practice would be to run over the bike with their trucks, so they were no longer usable. So I found this one, and I brought this back, and then Guillermo turned it into a couple instruments. This wheel he used kind of mimicking Marcel Duchamp's famous sculpture. And then he created this other thing that he sits and rides and plays. This is another photograph I made. You can see the Normandy wall there and the hills behind it. Guillermo created an instrument that's a percussion instrument. Those pink mountains he plays, and beautiful, strange sound. And nails I brought back from the border from the wall, he turned into a wall itself. And children's Bible. I found this children's Bible in that area where I told you the children had crossed. I found a couple of these, and he used the pages of that to landscape the bottom of the sculpture of the instrument. Quite a remarkable sounding piece too. These pants, I brought these back. Guillermo had it turned into pulp and turned it into paper, and then printed a score on those pants. This is Veronica. In California, there's a place where you're allowed to talk to family and people through the wall. And I photographed there, but then I met this woman who I photographed, and we talked for a half hour, had a great discussion. And if I ran into her today on the street, I would not know what she looks like. It's so, that grid mesh is so horrible, but you can't see who you're talking to. And in the actual photograph, if you look really carefully, you can see the eyes and mouth, and it's, you know, the print is really large, maybe in the show even. But that was kind of an amazing thing. And we actually corresponded a little bit after that. And I sent her a picture and all that. And then this is called The Other Side. I photograph people. Generally, I don't do portraits, you know, in this series. And but when I did have people, they were kind of small and through the wall. Little boy smiling and waving. This is Nogales. This was interesting. On the telephone pole on the Mexico side, somebody wrote "Fuck USA" just large enough to be legible by the Border Patrol as they drive back and forth through the slats. Kind of quirky, humorous, bizarre thing to do, but these boys were playing soccer. One of the things that struck me about this picture and this place in Tijuana, where I was on this side of the wall, nobody was using this beautiful beach. On the Mexico side of the wall, people were barbecuing, body surfing, playing. It was, you know, it was and filled with people having a fun time. And the irony is that on the U.S. side, you know, we're keeping them out, but we're, you know, it's kind of miserable on our side. It almost felt like a jail cell. And we were on the wrong side of the wall, or the jail. This is a detail looking through. Guillermo, and I'm ending my talk with a little piece that Guillermo made. And that's my talk. I'd love to take questions.
Richard, thank you so much for sharing with us. I mean, the imagery, the instruments, the sound, hauntingly beautiful, and definitely has us thinking in many ways. About the exact content that you were covering, but also just other things happening at this moment, both in the U.S. and along the Mexico border, but of course around the world. So thank you for sharing with us tonight. We do have a couple questions that have come in, so I'm going to go ahead and start with those. But as a reminder to our audience members, you're welcome to continue to submit those questions. If you're still processing and you want to get in and see the exhibition, if you haven't seen it yet at the Figge and then more questions come to you, of course, you're welcome to email them. I'm the one from whom you received the link tonight, Melissa Moore, so you can email and we'll get those to Richard and get responses to you. So, all right. Richard, you're telling stories and giving new life through your art. Do you ever photograph people, which you kind of addressed? Why no portraits? I know you had mentioned that you photograph them. Usually they're small and not the main part of the photograph. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, so an early body work I did, Telegraph 3M, which actually a number of those pictures are up at MoMA right now in New York. I did those about a half century ago, and I came away from that project feeling like I inadvertently exploited the people that I was trying to help and support and that I loved, and it made me very nervous about photographing people, and especially something along the border where people are suffering and things like that. So in a weird way, I felt like in that project, at least, absence is presence. I felt like the absence of people, I mean, there's so many symbols of their presence there, and there's so much journalism that photographs people, being arrested by the Border Patrol and this and that. That didn't feel like the right approach. More recently, in other bodies of work, I am photographing people at a show in New York right now, people in the ocean and things like that. And it's a very different kind of thing, though. But these are people that are suffering, often suffering things, and I just didn't feel comfortable.
Thank you for that. We actually have two questions now that have come in that are similar. So I'm going to go ahead and read both of them, and you're welcome to answer however you'd like. So the first is, have you ever interviewed people who have the wall going through their backyards? And the second is, how often did you have interactions with people on the other side of the border wall? And did you communicate in English or Spanish? Did you document these conversations in any writing? So really about the interactions that you're having as you're moving through these spaces. Yeah,
good. Actually, that's a really good question. So the first one was, again, did I talk to people and how did they feel? I did talk to people. I didn't interview everybody. I didn't talk to, I mean, that would have been a whole other, that's a whole other book to be done for sure. And other people have probably even done that. But I talked to people and I got mixed things. Some people would feel like it's crazy, and especially, so many people. One of the things I learned is that the border communities are not the United States and they're not Mexico. They are very much their own culture, they have their own language, Spanglish it's sometimes called. They share schools, they share money. People shop on both sides. There's an economic relationship. And a lot of those people feel like it's absurd. But then there's people, other people that maybe for political reasons or, are worried about losing jobs or maybe drugs or whatever. You get everything. You get the whole range. So that I experienced. In terms of photographing on the other side, I did a few photographs on the Mexico side, but it was a really interesting thing. I went over there, I had somebody, a friend who lived in Tijuana, give me kind of a tour, and it was really good, really powerful. It's a whole different landscape, a whole different world there. But I felt like I was an outsider. where I felt like it was okay for me to photograph the US-Mexico border from the US side because I'm an American and it's part of my culture and my responsibility. To represent the Mexican side of the border, I didn't feel comfortable. So I didn't, there's a few pictures, but really I didn't do that much. And most of that I did do, I put away.
You know, that's such an interesting perspective, and one that I'm sure will get all of us thinking about that, and the relationships we have and the responsibility we have to represent from where we are, and, you know, thinking about that. Thank you for that. Let's see, this is actually a question that came up during a docent training you did a while ago, and we didn't have a chance to get to it. Have border agents ever seen your exhibition? And if so, how did they respond?
Border agents, though,
Yeah.
You know, I imagine they did, but I don't know. A lot of people, this exhibition's gone around a lot. It's been remarkable how many people see it, but I don't necessarily have, they've not necessarily communicated with me or interacted with me. So that said, over time, I've talked to many border agents in my dealings. Sometimes they were very hostile and really just horrible and threatening and that kind of thing. Other times they were fantastic. Some would show me their cell phone pictures or tell me where to go get a better picture. In one case, this woman came with a rifle. I'm up in a remote area and she's climbing the hill. I'm going, oh God, what, you know, I'm in trouble now, that kind of thing. She gets up there after climbing way up while I'm photographing. You know, I pulled my car up there and she was there to protect me. She said that they understood that there was cartel activity in the, you know, not far from there. She just wanted to make sure I was okay. I mean, she had walked like a mile, you know, to get to me, and it was really, and she was really sweet. And there's other times when I went with a camera crew, you know, I learned a thing later on, which was really interesting. It's the Jedi mind meld from Star Wars, and in the early days, what I would do is I'd go and find these remote areas and photograph. And then before you know it, a big dust cloud would come at me with a Border Patrol agent coming in a fast car, anxious to see what I was doing. And in some cases, they actually went through my camera equipment looking for heroin and weird stuff like that, or were armed and angry. But I realized that they just didn't know who I was. So I learned the Jedi mind meld trick, which is I find the closest Border Patrol agent I could find in the area. I drive up to him really fast. I get out of my car. I go up to his window. I say, hi, my name is Richard Misrach. I'm a photographer. I'm going to be photographing there for 2 hours. I just want to let you know if you could let everybody else know. So he would go, oh, thank you very much. He'd call the other people and then they wouldn't be bothered. They could just hang out and do whatever they were doing and not worry about it because I set it up in advance. And it prevented me from having clouds of dust and anxiety coming at me, you know, while I'm trying to make a picture.
Oh, I'm sure. And it's really the only thing you can learn through experience, I suppose, but very smart.
That's one of the things at my age now, looking back, there's so many weird things that you learn over time in your process of getting there. And it proved to be really good. And I think the main thing I would want to say is that some of the Border Patrol agents were so nice, so helpful, so thoughtful, and then others were not. So I think it just mirrors humanity in general.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. All right. So are you and Guillermo collaborating on any upcoming projects?
No, I mean, Guillermo, I mean, we still are in communication and I'm, you know, we're doing some printing together, some things like that, but I'm off doing other kinds of things. I think he's off doing other kinds of things. I think the collaboration was remarkable. Again, one of those things where sometimes you just come together with someone. It almost seemed unlikely, and yet it turned out to be so poetic. One of the things that I think and again, a lot of this is after the fact. We did this. We're working on this thing before, you know, when Donald Trump became elected. He made the border wall a big thing. It wasn't that thought of in that scale when we were working together. And I think what we did recognize, though, is that the border wall, it was what I call an anti-monument, and it was separated two cultures. Yeah. Our collaboration bridges those two cultures. I think not only symbolically, the two cultures, but also our two mediums. It bridges two mediums and makes something that otherwise, it's better than the photography or the sound together, the two of them. There's something special for a project like this. But I don't know that we could do yet another one. I think sometimes you got to drop the mic and move on.
Well, the two of you certainly have created an amazing environment in this exhibition, one for reflection and also one that inspires empathy and creativity. I think one of the most rewarding things that we've been able to do in hosting this exhibition, beyond having the pleasure and privilege of working with you and Guillermo for your programs, has been working with students. In fact, one example is a young woman in a local high school who came in a pretty immersive program that we do, and one of her best friends came across the border with her family. They immigrated when she was little, and this friend, the young woman who was here, said, I've never thought about her journey. I've never asked her about it. I've never talked about it. She hasn't brought it up, and now I have such expanded empathy for her, and I just want to be a better friend and to learn more about that and the impact it's had in her life. And that's the sort of thing that we're so thrilled that we can take from this exhibition, which is hard.
Yeah.
It's difficult and it's ongoing. The themes that you explore in this. So thank you for that. We're really grateful. I know that we're actually going to be connecting you with another student group tomorrow, so I'm not going to take up too much of your time, but I know I speak for all of our audience members when I say we appreciate you, the work that you do, and sharing your passion and creativity with us tonight. So thank you for that, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you.
I also want to thank our audience members for joining us this evening, and I want to give a special thanks to the Art Bridges Foundation who made this program possible. We're very grateful for that. We do have upcoming programming happening here at the Figge. First, I do want to mention one more time, you have until June 5th to come to the museum and see Border Cantos, Sonic Borders. Hopefully you'll be able to make it down or come back again. There's always something new to see and hear in that exhibition, especially since the music is on a loop that I believe is about 4 hours. So anytime you come back, you'll probably have a different experience. Again, thank you to your audience members. Thank you, Richard. We really appreciate the presentation you did tonight. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.